Picture this. You've just left the bank, or maybe you just closed the browser tab after running the numbers on one of those mortgage calculators. And in your hand, or on your screen, is a number, a big number, the number they say you can borrow. And for a second, maybe longer than a second, it feels like permission, like someone official finally looked at your life and said, "Yes, you can do this. You can have the house. You've earned it." And that feeling is real. I'm not dismissing it. But here's the thing nobody tells you in that moment. That number doesn't belong to you. It belongs to them. And the gap between what they'll lend you and what you can actually afford without quietly dismantling your financial life, that gap is where millions of first-time buyers are currently living, confused about why homeownership feels so much harder than they expected. There's a specific reason the mortgage system is built this way, and once you understand it, you'll never look at a pre-approval letter the same way again. My name is Rachel, and I spend way too much time thinking about the psychology of money and the invisible structures that shape the biggest financial decisions of our lives. If you've ever stared at a mortgage figure and felt simultaneously excited and vaguely terrified, hit subscribe, because that exact feeling is what we spend all our time unpacking here on Rachel Invests. Before we get into the mechanics, let me paint you a picture of what the approval trap actually looks like in real life. It's buying a house at the top of your budget and then genuinely panicking when the boiler breaks 18 months later because there's nothing left. It's skipping holidays for 3 years running and telling yourself that's just what responsible homeowners do. It's the maintenance bill you didn't budget for because nobody told you that the average home costs between $10,000 and $15,000 a year just to keep standing. It's looking at your monthly statement and realizing that the mortgage, the rates, the insurance, and the upkeep are consuming so much of your income that the house you bought to build wealth is actually preventing you from building any. That's not a personal failure. That's what happens when you borrow the lender's number instead of your number. Here's where it starts. Banks use a metric called the debt-to-income ratio to decide how much they'll lend you. The standard threshold, depending on the lender and the market, is that your total debt repayments, including the new mortgage, shouldn't exceed roughly 43 to 45% of your gross monthly income. That's the pre-tax number, before the government takes its share, before superannuation or pension contributions, before anything. And here's something most people don't realize until it's too late. Gross income and take-home pay are not the same number. For most people on a median salary, they're not even close. Depending on your tax bracket and deductions, your take-home pay might be 65 to 75 cents of every dollar your employer pays you, which means the bank is calculating your borrowing capacity against money you will never actually see in your account. Run the maths on a real example. Say you earn $80,000 a year. That's $6,667 a month gross. At a 43% debt-to-income ratio, the bank might approve repayments of up to $2,867 a month. That feels manageable on paper, but your actual take-home pay, after tax, is closer to $5,200 a month, which means those approved repayments represent 55% of the money you actually have. Not 43, 55. Before food, before utilities, before the car, before the life that presumably continues after you buy the house. This is the gross to net gap, and it's baked into every single mortgage calculator, every bank's affordability model, every pre-approval letter you'll ever receive. They're not lying to you. They're just doing maths on a number that doesn't reflect reality. But here's where it gets really interesting. Because the gross to net gap is just the first layer. The second layer is what I call the approval high. The approval high is the psychological state that kicks in the moment a pre-approval letter arrives. And it's one of the most financially dangerous moments in a person's life. Not because anything bad has happened, but because something feels like it has. The letter is official. It has numbers on it. It came from a bank.
And your brain, which has been anxiously asking, "Can I afford a house?" for months or years, suddenly has an answer. Yes, this much, that figure. And what happens next is almost universal. The maximum borrowing figure stops feeling like a ceiling and starts feeling like a target. You weren't thinking about houses at that price before the letter arrived. Now you're filtering the listings by it. The pre-approval didn't just answer a question. It anchored your expectations to a number that was calculated by someone whose interests are not the same as yours. Think about it this way. The bank is not your financial advisor. The bank is a lender. Their model is built to calculate the maximum amount they can lend you while keeping the probability of default below a certain threshold. They are optimizing for their recovery position if things go wrong, not for your quality of life if things go right. Those are two completely different calculations. And yet we treat the output of one as if it answers the question the other is asking. Now, let's talk about the number that almost nobody calculates before they buy: the total interest paid over the life of the loan. Because this is where the maths gets genuinely uncomfortable. On a $500,000 mortgage at 6.5% interest over 30 years, your monthly repayment is approximately $3,160. Over 30 years, you will make 360 of those payments. The total amount you pay back is just over $1,137,000.
On a $500,000 loan, you borrowed $500,000 and you repay over $1 million. The interest alone, the cost of borrowing, exceeds $637,000, more than the original loan. Most first-time buyers have never seen this number. The bank doesn't put it on the front page. The mortgage calculator most people use shows the monthly payment and stops there. But the monthly payment is the most flattering version of the cost. The total repayment is the honest one. And here's something that might surprise you. That interest figure assumes you make every payment on schedule for the full 30 years and never refinance, never sell, never restructure. In reality, the average person sells or refinances within 7 to 10 years, which means most people never actually pay off the mortgage they took. They just carry it, pay mostly interest for the first decade, because that's how amortization works, front-loading the interest, and then reset the clock when they move or refinance. It's entirely possible to make a decade of mortgage payments and have made almost no meaningful reduction to the principal. The maths of amortization is something almost no first-time buyer is walked through before they sign. But wait, it gets worse. Because we haven't talked about the costs that don't appear on the mortgage statement at all. The ones that turn a manageable repayment into a financial straitjacket. There's a rule in property maintenance called the 1% rule. It states that you should budget approximately 1% of the purchase price of your home per year for maintenance and repairs. On a $500,000 home, that's $5,000 a year. On a $700,000 home, that's $7,000. In older homes, in colder climates, with more complex systems, the real number is often higher. Industry estimates for the average home run between $10,000 and $15,000 per year when you include the irregular but inevitable costs. New roof, hot water system, driveway, plumbing, electrical. These aren't optional. They're not surprises. They're the predictable cost of owning a physical structure that ages. And the number of first-time buyers who budget meaningfully for this before they buy is genuinely small. Most budget zero. The maintenance reality hits somewhere in year 2 or 3, right when the initial excitement of ownership has worn off, and the savings buffer built up before purchase has been depleted. Then there are the carrying costs that sit on top of the mortgage every single month. Rates or property taxes, depending on where you live, buildings insurance, contents insurance. If you're in an apartment or a planned community, strata or HOA fees, which in many markets have been rising at 5 to 8% a year. When you add these up honestly, The average homeowner pays 30 to 40% more per month than their mortgage statement suggests. Which means if your approved mortgage repayment is $3,000 a month, your actual monthly cost of home ownership is closer to $3,900 to $4,200 every month before anything unexpected happens. Here's the counterfactual that I want you to actually sit with. Say your bank approves you for a $550,000 mortgage, but based on your real take-home pay and the full cost of ownership, the number you can genuinely sustain is a $400,000 mortgage. The difference in monthly repayment between those two loans, at 6.5% over 30 years, is roughly $950 a month. Now here's what that $950 a month does if you redirect it instead of spending it. Invested consistently in a low-cost index fund at a historical average return of 8% annually, that $950 a month becomes approximately $174,000 after 10 years. $174,000, built not from earning more, not from some clever investment strategy, but purely from the decision to borrow the number that fits your life instead of the number that fits the bank's model. That's the real cost of the lender's number. So what does your number actually look like? Here's the framework I'd use, and it starts with take-home pay, not gross salary, because that's the money that actually exists. Take your monthly take-home pay, the number that hits your account. Multiply it by 28%, not 43, not 35, 28. That's the maximum your total housing cost, mortgage repayment, rates, insurance, and a basic maintenance reserve should represent of your actual income. On a $5,200 take-home, that's $1,456 a month toward total housing. Work backwards from there, factoring in current interest rates and the carrying costs specific to your market, and you'll arrive at a purchase price that you can genuinely sustain. It will probably be lower than the bank's number. In most major markets right now, it will be significantly lower. And that difference isn't a disappointment, it's information. It's the gap between the house that looks right on paper and the house that actually fits your financial life. Now, there's one more thing I want to say about this, because I'm aware that everything I've just described sounds like a reason to never buy. And that's not the point. Home ownership can be one of the most powerful wealth-building tools available when the numbers work. The forced savings mechanism of a mortgage, the capital appreciation over time, the stability, these are real. The point isn't to avoid buying. The point is to buy at a number that lets the investment actually work instead of simply consuming the financial oxygen in your life for the next 3 decades. The transformation that happens when you borrow your number instead of the lender's number isn't just about the monthly repayment. It's about becoming the kind of homeowner who actually builds wealth through the property instead of just servicing debt. It's about having the financial margin to handle the boiler, the roof, the rate rise, without those things becoming emergencies. It's about owning a home that expands your life rather than one that quietly contracts it. Most people who feel financially suffocated by their mortgage didn't make a reckless decision. They made a very normal one. They borrowed what they were told they could borrow, and they're only now discovering what that number actually cost them. You don't have to be one of them. Run your number, not theirs. And once you've done that, you might start to wonder what the same framework looks like when you apply it to the rest of the big financial decisions in your life. And how many of those are also being measured against someone else's number? That's a conversation for another time.